live here. Welcome everybody, John Perry here. We are doing another live stream. I'm going to be doing this all through the month of December. At the end of December, I will be going to Ecuador, so I won't be doing them there. But until the end of December, we'll be doing these. And when I get back from Ecuador in January, we'll start doing them again. I've had some people complain because they liked the more edited videos, and then when I stopped doing streams, I had people complain that they wanted me to do more streams. And what I'm doing here every time I do a live stream is I'm gonna have a really obvious red circle, the live stream icon in the title. And so you'll know if you're one of the viewers who would rather watch the edited videos, they will not have that big red circle on the front of the title. And for those of you who like the live videos, they will have the red circle on the title there. So that'll be the way to easily distinguish which type of video you're watching when it comes up in your feed. Today, I am joined by William O. And William, welcome. We are going to be talking today about science. What is science? We're going to be diving into that. William he studies ecology at the University of British Columbia. And just tell us about yourself. And by the way, I apologize for my lagging video. I'm not totally sure what's going on with my computer today, but all right. So William, tell us about yourself. Tell us what you're studying, What got you interested in it?
I guess I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a PhD student at UBC. I'm a community ecologist studying maintenance of biodiversity. So the questions that we ask, for example, are why are there so many species? Why not more? Why not less? And how do they coexist? And usually this is framed in terms of the context of competition, which I think arguably most of ecology and evolution is.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the idea that there's something out there, or there are niches that species kind of evolve to fit into. And I'm kind of interested in some sense like the inverse problem, where can organisms create those niches through their impact in their environments? And I'm trying to build some computer simulations, theoretical models, and also using some experiments to examine some of these ideas. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah.
Should I go into how I got here, or?
Yeah. Well, okay. So this is called computational biology, right? This whole field where you're trying to use math to model ecological systems. Is that right? And the dynamics of these systems?
Half and half. I think I think this is the misinterpretation that a lot of people have, where the math is just some way for us to formalize our concepts and ideas. It's kind of, at least how I'm using it, it's more of a proof of concept. And then we can start looking at what kind of systems might these work in. So I guess I'm using math as kind of more of a facilitative tool rather than something that's more grounded in this is it kind of a thing.
Yeah. So what got you interested in this in the first place?
I don't know, this specific question, or this biology in general, because this is so hard for me because I'm just I have a very broad set of interests.
Yeah.
But I guess what got me interested in this particular question is a little bit more on the philosophical aspect of biology, that's something that's always been interesting to me. Biology is something as a science, is so close to us, right? It's we are also living, and then when you're studying living things, you're whoa, what does that say about me?
Right.
And so I'm kind of interested in kind of exploring some of these ideas and how do we make sense of ourselves, and then is our notion of who we are also kind of influencing the kind of questions we ask and what kind of things we're looking for and how do we frame our theories and concepts.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's kind of the more big picture um, thing that got me interested in this. And of
So
course, like I think in like with any biologist and oh,
no,
gone.
that's fine.
But yeah, I feel like also with just any biologist, like, I'm just fascinated by the diversity of life forms on Earth. And yeah,
Yeah. So it's been for you. It's been a lot of like, what does this mean for us humans? Like when we're studying ecology, when we're studying evolution, or what does it say about us?
I think in the back of my head a little bit for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so, you and I met on Twitter, and it was uh, the last conversation I remember having with you. It was about the concept of agency. So uh, you were asking if biologists tend to frown on the idea that organisms have agency, and that's
Teleophobia, basically.
yeah. And you were asking why that is, and you were asking if it's a cultural thing. And my response was that just that word agency has a lot of baggage in
Mhm.
Western culture. All right, like
Yeah.
we
So it is a cultural
yeah, yeah,
thing.
yeah. I mean, I was
Okay.
raised in a super religious
Yeah.
background, and the like we talked about free agency all the time, and it was this sort of like mystical thing where we are fully free to you know determine our future and so on. And I
Hmm.
think yeah, it has this sort of a mystical, sort of a spiritual aspect to it
Hmm.
within Christianity. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons that a lot of biologists shy away from it, because it just has
Yeah.
all sorts of meaning behind it. But for sure, an organism that can respond to stimuli, it you could consider that thing to be an agent, right? It's
Hmm.
it's reacting to things around it. But there's if we're going to be making up terms, we would you know try to make up a term that doesn't already have a bunch of baggage, I suppose. But uh, this got us onto the
Yeah.
topic
Go ahead.
of what is science in general, and why are some things allowed to be talked about in science, some things that
Yeah.
are not allowed to, or just uh, we tend to have this phobia of using certain types of words to describe things in biology and so on. So I thought it'd be fun for us to do a video where we both present what our pictures are of science, uh, and then we see how different they are. But I think maybe even before we do that, where did you grow up, and do you think that influenced your view of science at all? Um,
Yeah,
uh,
that's a great question. It's just so I think this is a really like an important point to make. So because so growing up, I grew up in the Philippines
yeah.
and I went to a Christian school actually
Mhm.
um, for like 13 years.
Yeah.
And I grew up thinking I was like, believed in God and like was kind of a pretty devoted Christian in some sense. Um, and so much so that like I actually thought my parents were gonna go to hell because they weren't Christian.
Yeah.
um, and then yeah, and so that was definitely like one of my biggest um, kind of identity first, first like identity label, I guess. Um, but then like I learned science. I fell in love with it just because of how objective it is and like how universal that like I'm a single individual and a human being, but for some reason I share the same rules that like apply to me to and maybe there's some rules that apply to this chair that also apply to me some
Yeah.
sense, and I'm just like, wow, this is so cool. Um, and then of course, like I said, like, and then I was like, okay, well, let's look at biology, which is like literally what I am, and the science of that.
Hmm.
Um, and then I kind of got into genetics because I thought that was like, oh, it's so like so rigid and like we can explain everything from my own behavior, other people's behavior, society, and stuff like that. And just like, yeah, it's so much certainty there. And this is really funny because anyone who knows me now will know that this is so strange because I'm like super hating on some of these views now, or just the
Yeah.
idea of biological determinism.
Yeah.
But the point to make is that I was kind of a hardcore materialist and like, determinist, and now as a researcher, and the more I more read about some of this stuff, I'm just like I'm not sure if like yeah it when you go into detail about things and things look a bit hand wavy, and then so you just like start questioning whether the things you learned in school was actually like just obviously obviously always a simplification, right? But then people take
Yeah.
those simplifications as truth and objective, and so um, yeah, and so now I've been reflecting more about like how do we deal with this, and is it good or is it bad?
How do we deal with uncertainty in science?
Yeah, or
Yeah.
like how do we tackle communicating science to
Yeah.
public and also children?
Yeah. This is something that that I've also been really concerned with. Like, how do we deal with this? Was so obvious with COVID, but like, how do we communicate the uncertainty that exists in science? Even like, because I create teaching materials for classrooms, and I definitely don't want to like give a false impression that everything that we understand is rock solid. Of course, there's lots of there's lots of gaps in our understanding, and I want to be able to communicate that. And I I mean, it's been a big part of my priority from the start with Stated Clearly. I don't know how many animations you watched, but or which ones did you watch? Do you remember which ones you'd seen?
I think I saw the random mutations that oh animations. I think
Yeah,
there's a Origin of Life one or something,
yeah,
right?
yeah. There's several of those.
Yeah.
So in those ones, my I was working with the Center for Chemical Evolution, and
Right.
one of our big goals was to make it very clear to the audience that the problem's not solved, because
Hmm.
uh, we did a couple of presentations early on with the public, and we had people raise their hand if they thought that this was already solved and figured out, and a bunch of people thought that the origin of life was already solved, and this made Nick Hudd, who's the director of the center, he was frustrated with this because he would get students in that would think that as well. And he's like, no, I'm trying to recruit people that can help us figure this out. So there has been this big problem in science communication where we have somehow oversold what we know and don't know, or
Hmm.
and so what we try to do with those videos is be very very clear about what's understood and what's not understood, what are the problems that we're trying to work on, and so on. So I don't know what your impression was of that video, but hopefully you felt that we were being transparent there with all that
Hmm.
stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so okay, so you were raised in you grew up in the Philippines,
Yeah.
Christian background. Did you leave your religion when you when you got really into science?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I was like just became hardcore atheist.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
like we don't need these explanations to explain the empirical world.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
Where
which
are
is
you
kind of
at
real.
now with that?
I mean, oh, I'm kind of leaning towards. I guess I consider myself more of an agnostic now.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I think this is related to the certainty aspect, where like I'm just a skeptic, and so it's really hard to say that there's nothing. And like I guess also maybe my definition of God is a little bit. I'm more open to different definitions of what God is. It's definitely not a guy with a white beard,
yeah,
but it could
yeah,
be some kind of natural force or maybe a group of things, entities, or yeah.
yeah. All right. So how would you define science?
Um, okay, let's see. I have this written down. This is a such an important thing to not screw up.
Yeah,
But um, so I think the science is the process of generating explanations of empirical observations through the reciprocal feedback between theory and experimentation.
Nice.
And just to add on to that, so I think explanations are generated via kind of this process of consensus building, which makes science a social enterprise subject to biases, values, and historical contingents. So ideally, we should remove these things, but I'm not sure if it's possible. And if it's not possible, I think we should definitely be critical and confront them.
Wait, so explain that again. So the contingent, it's contingent on like
Historical
history.
context.
Yeah, historical context. And
so where did an idea come about in history? Where in space, geographically, and who said it? How did they say it? Kind of.
Yeah. What were even their politics at the time? Yeah. So my definition of science, pretty similar to yours. I describe it as the collection and documentation of observations, and an ongoing argument about what those observations might mean. And I say argument because things get really intense in science, which is fun.
Yeah.
But the foundation of science is these observations, and one of the big things that I think sets apart the scientific movement, I guess. When you try and study the history of science, it's very you just learn about people in Europe, basically, when you're studying science history, which is a shame. Like, I really wish, I wish that we spent more time studying things like alchemy, and especially studying things that, like, because obviously if you look at different cultures around the world, when we say that science was, coming into being, which is what, like, Galileo's time is kind of when we think of modern science coming about. But there were huge civilizations that obviously had something akin to science. Otherwise, they wouldn't have these giant, amazing structures and societies that they're living
Absolutely.
in. But the big shift that happened, at least in Western thought at that time, was take no one's word for it. There's the slogan "Nullius in verba," which is from I think it's the Royal Society, the Scientific Society's slogan, which means take no one's word for it. And that, talking about historical context, I'm not a historian, but I would say that comes from it comes a lot from the rebellion against the Catholic Church. You had all the Protestants that were trying to interpret their religion from the Bible, like observations that they're making in the text of the Bible, and then comparing that to what the Pope was saying. And so you had this big revolution within Christianity at the time. And it seems like that way of thinking bled over into observations in nature. And so we have this very strict form of argument that happened within Christianity that bled over into science. And then you have, instead of focusing on what you were seeing in the Bible, they were focusing on what we're seeing in nature. And that is observation is the doctrine that everything else is based on. So it's the foundation of science. And they became extremely, extremely strict about that. And that's, I think, what really separates the thing that we call Western science from things that were happening before then. It's just like observation is the king here.
When you say observation, do you mean like induction?
Yeah. Things that you take in with your senses that you can show someone else and they would agree that, yeah, that's so. Like, I can show you at what temperature water boils at, and I can show you that it's different high up on a mountain versus at sea level. I can show you these things. You can see them. I can show you a fossil. We might not agree on what it is, but I can show it to you. And I can point out all the observations that I'm making with it. We can feel it. You can lick the thing. You can you can use your senses, and then we can argue about what on earth that means. Like, what does this skeleton frozen in rock mean? And and you just have this collection of observations, more and more observations they build up, and then you end up coming up with a conclusion or with some sort of a description to tie all those things together. And that description, like the way that we interpret everything, is very much influenced by our culture. It's very much influenced by different power structures within that society, which is why it's so important now. I mean, it was important from the start that the more people from more cultures that we have that are doing this, I think that the more true or the more accurate our conclusions end up being, because we have people fighting back and pushing back on things, and it's been I feel like it's very important to reach out to larger audiences, which is why I do science outreach, because we want more people from more backgrounds joining in on this argument. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just want to say that I'm not sure if it's observation alone that's kind of the basis of science. So I feel like one thing that diverges between my definition and your definition is the emphasis on the feedback between theory, or I say concept development, and observations.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of theory latedness of observations.
No. Sorry, say that again.
Theory latedness.
Theory relatedness. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is really funny because I'm kind of like an empiricist, but do a little bit of theory, and I kind of think about these two things simultaneously.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because like I actually just gave a talk recently about this. Theoreticians, they look at empiricists and they're like, oh, it's just data. It's just so stories, whatever. It's not rigorous. It's not mathematical. And then like the empiricists would say, oh, it's just theory. It's not real, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But like, I think it's almost impossible to do any sort of observations without any theories. Because what we choose to observe, what we think is relevant, still comes with some sort of theoretical foundation. So for example, I'm like counting ants, right? And so like I have to have a concept of what an ant is and like what constitutes an individual. And so and obviously that's going to reflect on your data and your observation.
Yeah.
And so it's really, I think it's really important to acknowledge the theory or framework that you're using. So then that you can basically falsify it, refute it if things go unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I've used this analogy when I'm teaching about what is science before, where like, imagine you wake up in a castle and there's just puzzle pieces up to your waist. There's this giant castle. You don't know how big the castle is. You don't know if these puzzle pieces make a picture or not, but you just start walking around and you start finding, you end up finding pieces that seem like they fit together. And just imagine that this puzzle is cut in a way that it's just a jigsaw puzzle, but it's cut in a way that any piece could be linked to any other piece. But you start finding pieces that, they're kind of the same color. I think maybe there's actually a picture here. You start putting together a picture, and then other people are doing the same thing, and they're coming up with different pictures. The general idea that everyone has is that there is a picture here. And people are going to start putting together those pictures. And as they start doing that, as a picture starts to form, that's going to tell you what puzzle pieces you're missing, and it's going to help you figure out what you should look at. And so this is like, if you consider these puzzle pieces the observations, and then the linking of the puzzle pieces as theory building, the theory tells you what you should go out and look for. So that's, I guess, the theory ladenness of observation. That's going to direct me, and my picture might be totally wrong, and so I'm ignoring pieces that would fit in it, right? And I'm looking for pieces that just aren't. They have nothing to do with what's real. So you can definitely get stuck in a trap, and we saw this with with the Black Plague, for example. All the different theories that people went through with the Black Plague, like. Some people thought that it was the asteroid, or it was like it's like stars that were bringing the Black Plague. Some people thought that it was bad smells. Some people thought that it was certain groups of people that were doing it. So they executed thousands of Jews during the Black Plague were executed because they were blamed for poisoning the well and so on. So these are all bad theories, and people were building this picture based on observations that they're making, just the wrong observations. And we can do this for a long time in science. We can do this, politically and so on. So yeah, it is a problem. But what we see is that these pictures that are built, these theories that are built, they get replaced by better ones, like the picture that's leading to more discoveries, because these theories help us create hypotheses, and the hypotheses tell us where to go look for new observations. Mm-hmm. And when you have a good theory, it's going to be consistently leading you to new observations that fit and help you build that picture more effectively, more efficiently. So how do you feel do you feel like there's a solid progress in science, or do you feel what is your current feeling in your own field of research? Like, are we spinning our tires, or are we making progress?
I think we're definitely moving forward. That's not, yeah, for sure. But the question is more of, can we move faster and better and more justly? Like the question that I'm kind of really interested in myself is, do theories and concepts, frameworks necessarily have to replace each other? It's not like a process of elimination kind of thing, right? So I'm a little bit of a pluralist, and this is a little bit kind of like my view about agency as well. I'm not sure if it's like ontologically real and true, but if this framing of the question of living things it might have the same explanatory power as opposed to without the idea of agency. But what if this kind of framing leads us to new questions that we can still build theories around? Is that valuable then? And that's something that we can't necessarily judge, right? Because it's something we don't even know yet. And so it's really hard to evaluate these frameworks when you don't know what they could lead to.
Right. So there's there is in science there is a toppling and a replacement of theories, but also you're right. You can have multiple theories at once, obviously. So multiple research programs. Do you know Lakatos, the philosopher of science?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, he talks about research programs. So he talks about multiple competing research programs will exist. And those research programs are based on a theory. And that theory itself is never questioned by the research program. It's founded on it. So the foundational theory of the research program is considered to be true. And then you just use that theory to generate hypotheses and test those hypotheses. And the way he pictures science is that you've got a bunch of these going at once. Different scientists are working on different theories, and those are in competition with each other, but loosely. If your theory is consistently leading to new discoveries, then it's a good theory. It doesn't mean it's true. It just means it's a good theory. That the research program is, I think he calls it a progressive research program. And basically he said, if you have a progressive research program, most likely you're going to be consistently attracting funding and consistently attracting new researchers. Yeah. And you could have a bunch of these very different research programs studying the same topic, and they might all be equally progressive for a while, but eventually one will, in most cases, one will eventually end up attracting the majority of people because it's working more efficiently, and it will end up overcoming overwhelming the other research programs. So it's kind of like it's in contrast to like the Kuhnian revolutions where
Yeah,
there's
I was gonna bring that up.
yeah. So I suppose he's kind of more of a pluralist,
Yeah.
like what you're saying. And the other thing that I'm hearing from what you're saying is that there's kind of there's different ways to frame the same problem.
Hmm.
I've noticed this in the theory of evolution. Like there's like the kin selection models, which are
Yeah.
using kind of like the classical the classical mathematics, and then there's the new group selection stuff,
Yeah.
which I've heard from I've talked at length with Stuart West about this, who's
Yes.
over at Oxford, and he describes what he's saying is that there's because he argued against the group selection stuff for a long time, and what he's saying is that the group selection people right now, they're actually not wrong. They're looking at things from a very different perspective, but their math works out. He finds that the way that they're doing things is complicated and kind of it's like the long route for
Hmm.
solving most problems. But he
Yeah.
says that at this point they've actually solved a lot of the problems that he had issues with earlier on. They've solved
Hmm.
those, and they've found basically just a different way to a completely different way to think about the same thing,
Yeah.
and they're basically coming to the same conclusions. So
Yeah.
there, it's like there's several ways to do a long division, right?
Hmm.
And you
Yeah.
get to the same answer. And
Yeah.
exploring different routes is valuable, I think.
Hmm.
So I don't see a problem with this pluralistic way of doing things. One problem I do see though is that scientists will talk past each other. Scientists will think that they have that they are the ones that figured out the true way of
Yeah.
thinking about this. They'll pretend that they've triggered a Kuhnian revolution,
Yeah.
and that they now have the capital T truth on and it gets really childish. It's like from the outside looking in, it's kind of funny to watch, but
I mean, okay, so there's a lot of things here.
yeah,
One of the thing is more of like kind of like the materialist aspect of it because, everyone's still trying to, you know, secure a job or like find
right,
more fellowship. And so it's important to kind of stand by your own um, ideas, I guess. But I feel like there's also kind of maybe a historical legacy effect of like Karl Popper's falsifiability, like Occam's razor, for example.
hmm
And I feel like these ideas aren't actually um, they don't explicitly claim this, but I feel like it gives the false impression to people that there is like one true thing, even though
yeah,
we don't get there, but we're slowly getting there. Or like, yeah, basically just this one thing. But these falsifiability and Occam's razor are themselves philosophical stance. Like these things, these concepts aren't falsifiable themselves. And so
yeah,
like when you use these as claims for like your theory is better or something, like it's not grounded on any form of like um, ability to explain more or whatever.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's one reason that I've really liked Lakatosh as a philosopher. Unfortunately, he died like halfway through really putting together his thoughts. But in fact, a lot of his best stuff was published after he died. But he was very much, yeah. He did not believe. He seemed not to believe that you come to these solid conclusions. He was very much like, if it's working, keep doing it. If it's not working, then stop. So I guess
Hmm.
just yeah. If it's leading to new discoveries, it is good. Um, and I really like that way of thinking about science instead of trying to say that this is the true way. I
Yeah.
like during COVID, it was the worst of it because there's very little data on everything. So all the things that we were doing, um, we have the public health groups are trying to come up with solutions for like how do we deal with COVID, and they kept on using science as this like we have the science, and so this is true. This is what we should be doing. And it was like, I've seen the data that you're basing all of these conclusions on. It's not very good data. It's the best that we have. I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but people kept overstating our certainty on, the usefulness of masks, the effectiveness of vaccines, like everything was overstated. And like people can tell, like when you're over promising and under delivering consistently, people notice. And it ended up being like everything was oversold to the point that it caused people to rebel and have good reason to not trust what they're being told. Just that. If we had just been more transparent, like, hey, we don't know fully what's going on here, but we think that this vaccine is the best way to go. It was just, it was almost like, it was very an emotional time for me seeing the people just misuse science, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But the reputation of science.
It's just so difficult though, because I feel like, well, I don't know how this might turn out, but if scientists or, politicians paint the picture that science is the most robust way of doing things, if they communicate it as if there is some kind of uncertainty, will people take it as like, oh no, they don't know what they're doing? Or like what, like basically, am I saying like being transparent of your uncertainty, does that make it more trustworthy or less trustworthy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. For me, it makes it way more trustworthy. I mean, one of the things that, growing up religious, I had this too, is that we are like behind the pulpit, there's 100% certainty of everything. Like your pastor knows exactly what's happening, or they pretend to. Yeah. And so that's what people are being sold at church. And if people are being sold uncertainty from government agencies or from scientists, then they interpret that as weakness, which is just their own ignorance. I mean, what they're hearing from behind the pulpit is, it is the person's just pretending. So it's a hard problem. Like, how do you, when you're trying to deliver information to the masses, how do you do it in a way that's actually going to hit? But I just feel like, pretending that we have more certainty than we actually do is not the way to go. I feel like transparency is the way. It's how it's the guiding principle in my work. And I do get a lot of people who, I have a video, what is the evidence for evolution? And people, and I get a lot of comments like, oh, the evidence suggests, huh? Oh, these are the conclusions. That you don't know anything. And I get those types of comments all the time. Yeah. But it's like, that's how reality works. We actually don't know what the heck we are. There's a lot of uncertainty. And
it's really easy to like just label God.
Right.
Anything we don't know, God.
Yeah.
Fixes everything.
Yeah. And so even like, I would consider, most people consider me either an agnostic or an atheist, because where I'm at with religion is that, so far as I can tell, all of the gods that people believe in are cultural inventions. Mm-hmm. But so far as I can tell, it's not like I don't know, because, I don't understand everything about the cosmos. But that's where I stand tentatively at this point in my life. And so some people would consider that to be an atheist, some people would consider that to be agnostic. But it's I feel like the healthy way to think about reality is that obviously we're very limited in our understanding. we don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going on. We only know what's right in front of us.
Yeah.
And I feel like, so as far as like public health officials, I feel like the best thing for them to do would be to, especially at this point in history, is to be more transparent, because I think maybe in the past you could have an authority figure just tell people how things are and no one would be able to check them on it. But now we have the internet, and there's a lot of smart people that are questioning things, and you can't really, I don't think that our government officials, like health officials, can get away with just saying what they want. Like we have to be,
Yeah.
we have to find a new way to deal with things. Like I think transparency is the way forward. Like that, it always should have been, and I think the internet is going to force us to be transparent
Hmm.
moving
Yeah.
forward. So,
But yeah, this is kind of related to what I was saying about like consensus building, and that science is kind of like a social activity. Like basically, once you have your information out there, then people can kind of, in a sense, vote on it, right? And then the ones that kind of do kind of receive the most support kind of becomes at least the best theory at the present time.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, so I hear a lot of people complain about scientific consensus. Like that's a really bad way to come to a conclusion, is through consensus, because it's conclusion by voting.
Mhm.
Like so right now, I don't know how much we want to go into this, but like the origin of COVID is, we don't have enough data to say anything solid as to exactly how COVID originated. There's these, I mean, early on, nowadays, whenever a new virus comes out, that like the the government, the U.S. government considers three possibilities. They consider it to be engineered as a weapon. They consider it to be a lab accident, and they consider it to be a natural origin, which is the most likely for anything, is the natural origin. We've pretty solidly ruled out that this is a weapon, but still, there are these two hypotheses on the table, that this was a lab accident or that this was a natural origin, and people are not like, we don't have enough data to say for sure one way or the other, but people are just they're fighting about it as if we do have enough data. I don't know if you've been following that argument
I haven't
much.
been following that much.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
well, let's talk about your research a little bit more. I had you publish an article on what's it called, Bios Squared.
Bios too. Yeah.
Yeah, Bios too. Okay. Yeah. And that was, oh man, I didn't write down the title of that article. It was, do you remember
I
what it
think
was?
it's computing biology or biology computing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Computing, yeah. I'll put a link to that in the video description for people to read afterwards. I really liked it. One of the things that you said in the article, you said evolution by natural selection, a process unique to life, is itself an optimization algorithm. And so you're thinking about this, you're thinking about biology as computation, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really like that. Uh,
So I don't want to make the argument that it is. It's more of just like a framework that I see it as, and I find it useful for.
yeah,
I think that's an important distinction to make. That like, yeah, people take their framework as the thing itself, but it's really
right.
just some kind of representation.
Well,
Yeah.
tell us what you mean by that. Tell us what it is for you to think about biology as computation.
I mean, this is actually kind of yeah, I guess like so the something that got me into computation is the fact that I actually am horrible at math.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, me too.
and then yeah, and then I guess like towards the end of my undergrad, I learned a little bit of coding and like stats, and then like for some reason like it kind of stick to me, and I could understand the math a bit more, and the things come in discrete chunks, and then how when I write a function. I have to actually code it up. And it feels like, for me, it's like super tangible, and I can see how the bits come together to form this function or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it just became super intuitive to me. And then I realized like, oh, this is like super, super meta in the sense that like, when every time I'm making decisions, I'm like waking up and like going, taking the bus, and like there's like, it's very procedural. And
Yeah.
then if you like do a lot of coding, you realize, oh, it's kind of like similar to like how programs work. You follow these
Yeah.
steps, and this is what you do. And so for me, that I had I guess like gravitated towards this more computational view, and I found it super intuitive. And I also recognized that this is also very lifelike, that life has this capacity to process information and make decisions on these based on these information that they receive and process. And
Yeah.
so for me, that was like a super like natural way into like this notion of computational biology. But like weirdly enough, yeah, so this my article was a little bit making the distinction between these two different approaches.
Yeah.
One is so like I think traditional computational biologists, you're thinking like bioinformatics and people like running a lot of scripts to like analyze, genomes and stuff like that, and like doing some machine learning algorithms to find like data and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of more interested in, okay, wait, how does the organism do that?
Right.
How are they doing statistics? I don't want to do statistics on them. I want to know how they do statistics. And yeah, I feel like that's opened a lot of avenue in terms of research questions and how to think about things.
Yeah. There's a really neat video. I think probably the first time that I started thinking about organisms as computers, as doing calculations. I mean, obviously, like if I'm playing basketball, right? I'm doing calculations, but I'm not doing them in a mathematical way. Like if I'm throwing a ball into a hoop, I'm making a calculation, and I felt my way into those calculations. So it's through trial and error, right? But there's a really neat video I watched. It was a David Attenborough video on plants, and it was a video about the Venus flytrap, and if it's got these hairs inside the flytrap, and if a fly hits those hairs 3 times within a certain time frame, it'll snap shut, because it's that's how it's evolved to be like, okay, if something hits once, maybe something just fell on me. If something hits twice, maybe something's moving in the wind. But 3 times, most likely there's food there. But it's so interesting to think about this, because I'm thinking like, what is happening here? Well, these hairs are triggered, and it's causing some sort of chemical probably to span out through the tissue of this organism. And then if that happens again, more of that chemical, and it's like there must be like a level where when there's enough of that chemical, then the thing snaps shut. And so there's some sort of an overflow that's set inside the organism. It's set in advance inside the organism that, when there's this much of this chemical flowing through my body, I snap shut. And it's, I mean, it's...
There's basically logic gates in cells.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the other really beautiful thing is I've been studying, this was a while ago, I was looking into this, is how it is that new blood vessels are summoned. So when there's a bit of tissue that's oxygen starved, it'll send out a molecule it's actually a part of the metabolism. When a cell's not getting enough oxygen, it starts screwing up, it messes up its metabolism, and it starts secreting these molecules that are an honest signal that it's struggling. And there are cells in our blood vessels that receive that molecule, and they start growing towards it. And so they're using it's the same thing that if you see an amoeba that smells something and is going towards it to eat it, it's the same exact same mechanism. I mean, you have this cell that it's basically it smells that and it's going towards it, I mean, it smells it.
Yeah.
It's got receptors. It's grabbing those molecules and digesting them, and then moving towards them. It's just moving to where they're stronger and stronger and stronger. And you've got all these blood vessels growing towards it at the same time. When one of them gets there first, then the scent goes away because it's giving oxygen to this cell, this bit of tissue. So it stops sending the signal. So the other vessels stop growing. So you get this like perfect growth of blood vessels as needed, when needed, and you don't need any map. It's just all
exactly.
It's so cool how it works, and that is
exactly.
Yeah, it's a type of computation that's a very analog type of computation that's happening.
Self-organizing.
I love that. It's just so cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could say everything from when we wake up in the morning, we have two desires. One desire to stay in bed, one desire to get up and do our thing. And it's a calculation based on chemistry. Like, how much of a drive is there for me to get up and start my day? How much of a drive is there for me to stay in bed? And it's just a calculation that's happening, right?
I will say though, like, I feel like everything you said is right and definitely true, but there's also a more active. So I think everything you've been saying is very kind of passive and reactive. Like you were giving examples of chemicals and like basically reducing it to kind of like the biochemistry. But this is something I've been like, I think this is, well, in the literature, I'm pretty sure it's like well-founded. The idea that some computational entities have the capacity to forecast or anticipate. And so they're basically anticipating things that don't even exist yet, or they haven't sensed yet. And so I think this is kind of why I feel like this agential view is kind of important, and actually might be ontologically relevant in the sense that certain organizations give the entity the capacity to build some sort of mental model and forecast things that they haven't seen yet. And because this is a forecast, they're not reacting to something. They're basically trying to do something that they think might happen. And so this is what this becomes kind of like active and more agential, I guess.
Yeah, so obviously we're familiar with ourselves doing this because we're always forecasting. We think about the future probably as much as we think about the past and the present.
Mm-hmm.
So we're constantly trying to do that. How far back do you see this happening, or far back? How simple of an organism do you see that's doing this? That's actually trying to make novel predictions about the future. I guess by what? By mixing observations of the past into new.
It's kind of founded upon the notion of counterfactual reasoning.
Yeah.
So basically, ability to like, what if? Ask the question of what if. And I'm not. This is something I'm still like figuring out myself. It's like whether or not this capacity isn't necessarily requires some kind of cognitive architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you look into the computational and like kind of information theory perspective, then like you don't like I kind of wrote that in the paper, in the blog as well. It's like matter doesn't matter as long as you have those organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Then it can have the capacity to form or make anticipations.
So you're saying that a nervous system doesn't matter as long as you have a network of some sort that's set up in the right way. It can have a mind.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I mean, the thing is kind of like going to colonies, for example, like slime molds and like ant colonies, where those individuals actually don't do anything, but collectively they're kind of processing information, exchanging information, and that somehow gives them some kind of higher level functionality that you can't just reduce to the parts.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about that a little bit more here, but let's just for viewers who are still watching, if you have any specific questions for William, just type those down in the comments. It seems like I wasn't really watching comments, but it seems like there's a little bit of an argument going on in there about. It looks like some sort of a religion argument going on in there. If you guys have specific questions about William's research, about his scientific thinking, or about fundamentally what is science and how is it different from other things that we do, let us know in the comments. But yeah, let's talk a little bit more about this. So that last thought, I've heard a lot of people complain about reductionism, right?
Yeah.
And I don't understand the frustration with it. For me, it seems like in order to understand a system, you have to understand its parts and how they come together to make the larger system. And for me, that's what reductionism is. It's just like, okay, we see a system, we can study that system in and of itself, but also we can pick it apart and study the subsystems of that system. And we can keep doing that until we hit this foundation where we're too dumb to look further because we just don't know how to look deeper. And to me, that seems like that's what reductionism is. And how could that possibly be bad? But I see a bunch of people complain about reductionism, that we oversimplify things. So I don't know if that's totally different from what you were just saying. You were saying that
yeah, a little bit. I mean, sometimes it's useful to, sometimes it's not necessarily helpful to look down into the parts, because the parts might not have whatever thing you're trying to explain.
Right.
And so I mean, the example that a lot of people often give is, carbon atoms, right? You have these carbon atoms, and then somehow you can form graphene or higher level crystalline structures that give the property of the property of the material. But there's nothing about the carbon atom that tells you it can do that, right? You have to still just put them in that way. And yeah. And so, and I think this is another aspect of it is that it kind of promotes dogmatism, which is that, we can just reduce everything to physics. And then the problem right now with, especially with theoretical physics, is that you go into these super theoretical physics, and then everything just becomes even shadier. And then so we thought that going down might help there's more certainty, and then all of a sudden we see quantum mechanics and everything just breaks down. It's okay, so at the bottom of this we still don't have certainty. So so how does the reductionism work if we go to the very bottom level, we see even more randomness?
Okay, well, but here's my argument though. So we talk about carbon, for example, it's playing with little carbon models that we can figure out all the different ways that you can set up a carbon structure, right?
Yeah.
And then it's understanding how carbon works in real life and the types of reactions that can get you to build a lattice versus, it really is understanding carbon that helps us understand all the different things you can build with carbon. So I don't understand how understanding the pieces doesn't help us there.
Oh, I mean, I'm not denying reductionism, but the fact that that's not always helpful in understanding the thing we're explaining.
Yeah.
So I always think of this myself, and I find it helpful. I don't know if you're familiar with cellular automata, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you know how there's elementary cellular automata rules. If your neighbor depending on how many neighbors you have, you kind of you stay
can
alive,
reproduce.
yeah, exactly. And so these different rules produce different structures, right?
Yeah.
And so, for example, the game of life, right? There's certain rule and then you can generate game of life. And then the interesting thing is that let's say you analyze all these rules. Without running it, can you know which one will generate the game of life?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way to figure like
Yeah,
the
exactly.
only way we can figure out the game of
Just
life is
run
to
it.
run it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so like there's nothing in that elementary rule that tells you what it will give rise to.
Well,
Um,
no one's figured out how to predict it, right? From from
uh,
from first principles. So what you're saying is that from first principles you cannot figure out you cannot go from first principles to of of any system to like what's possible, what can possibly emerge from it. You can't predict just based on the rules what's going to happen,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I think this is proven though, just based on like I think
Well,
founded on
yeah.
Gödel's and Completeness theorem and stuff like that.
Well, there's
There
a
are some problems that
prize.
are undecidable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a prize right now to try to find a way to make predictions with cellular automata, and I think the purpose of the
yeah,
prize is just kind of a middle finger, like you can't do it, it's not possible.
yeah, exactly.
I think that's what the point is.
Yeah,
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 but
exactly.
yeah, so I agree with you that we can't to predict what can emerge from first principles is very difficult, and I think you're right that it's impossible in many ways. But to understand what's already happening by understanding the pieces that are coming together to make it, I think that's super helpful. Like if I want to understand how a bicycle works, it
Take it apart.
understanding yeah understanding
Yeah,
how
yeah, for sure.
the gears all work is really
Yeah,
important. I feel like there's a like in this in this debate that I keep seeing pop up mostly on Twitter where reductionism is bad basically.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
well, I kind of feel like the anti-reductionists are making a cartoon of what we're doing. I mean, we're trying to break things apart to figure out how the pieces work and how they work together to generate the emergent
yeah.
property. Uh, I got a
So I
question.
feel,
Sorry,
oh,
go ahead.
I just want to say like I feel like especially people that are working on origin of life, this is a particular relevant question.
Yeah.
Is because and that might be a reason why reductionism kind of fails because it's like I don't know if you're familiar with like Stuart Kauffman or Robert Rosen or like
Hmm.
Francisco Varela. They have this notion of organizational closure, where the parts don't even exist without the whole, right? And so like you can't even separate them because once you separate them, those parts don't exist anymore. And so you can think about, for example, like the citric acid cycle,
Yeah.
where you have these different components. But if you like split one up, the whole thing just like disappears, right? And so like it's really hard to just like isolate them because that's taking the context out of it, right? And so once you take the context out, then that's not even relevant anymore. Um, yeah, I mean, so there's like arguments for that reason, and also arguments why like biology or living organisms aren't machines, because they're not like mechanizable in that sense. Um, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That that
Anyways,
that is that's an argument that I don't fully understand. Like
yeah.
um, it does seem to me that well, like the citric acid cycle, for example, we've built um, chains. So we have a lot of different partial versions of the citric acid cycle that we've been able to find.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and as long as you have something that's feeding it, it can keep on. It can keep working. It's just that
Mhm.
unless until it's a full cycle, it's not self-sustaining. But
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can feed it. You
Yeah.
can you can feed a linear reaction, and it'll keep going
Okay.
forever. But so yeah, we can reduce those things. We can reduce them in lots of different ways, and they still work. They just don't work the way that it's working now. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I I do feel like breaking these things apart is how breaking them apart, seeing how they work in different ways is super helpful. We got a couple of questions here from the audience here. So
Sure.
George says, how do you think consciousness factors into the material view of science? There are many research programs attempting to synthesize phenomenology, conscious thought with the psychology or neurobiology. Your thoughts on that?
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Wait, so sorry, what was the question? Like, what is consciousness? What? How does
Yeah.
it fit into
How does it fit
science?
into materialism?
Materials wheel?
Yeah.
Damn.
That's like the crux of the
Well,
problem, right?
I mean, like, if you take that consciousness is a emergent phenomena of material processes, then yeah, I guess like finding neurocorrelates or like kind of understanding how neurons work is basically the solution. Um, but if you have a stance that consciousness is more of a immaterial thing and has its own existence beyond the material world, then yeah, I don't know how to tackle that. I do know some people are like trying to do some experiments with that. For example, like with like meditation, for example.
Yeah.
There's some scriptures that like consciousness is its own. Basically, you can think about these two worlds, and then like they're kind of it materializes in the. I think about it as like a stream of like or like a radio channel, and then the material was somehow like just tunes into that like consciousness, and that's why like consciousness somehow is projected into the material world.
That's how
But
you think of the dualist picture of consciousness.
yeah, yeah. And so I think some people are proposing experiments with like meditation, for example. So the idea of meditation is that somehow when you just like go absolutely into this like deep meditative state, you can actually kind of be in that like pure consciousness state. And the idea is that, if since we all are channeled in on this like one consciousness source, and the idea is that like different people might be able to see the histories and memories from that consciousness. And so maybe me and you, we have different lives, right? But then for some reason, if we go on a deep meditative zone, we start seeing the same thing. And so that might be a sign or that we are shared by this like single consciousness thing. It will be some kind of evidence for it.
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to study because I think so. Just thinking about with the history of Western science, we have this really solid love for observations, mainly visual observations. It's the main type of observation that science is based on.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to turn it like an experience that someone has while meditating into something that everybody else can study.
Yeah.
So I know that people are trying to get better and better at brain scans and so on, because that's one way that we could, we can turn in these like personal experiences into everyone has access to observe this personal experience because we have brain scans and we can trust these brain scans better than someone's testimony. Because again, the slogan of science is nullius in verba, take no one's word. And you literally have to take someone's word to study their conscious experience, right now.
Yeah.
So these brain scans are kind of helping us so that we don't have to take their word, but it's difficult. The idea that I would say that the two main ideas about consciousness, one idea is that it emerges from our nervous system. The other idea, or somehow of the body and the material body, the other idea is that it's a separate thing and that we are receiving it. We know that we're either generating it or we're receiving it because if you injure the brain, it ruins the person's ability to be conscious, right? So obviously,
that's what we think, at least.
obviously, the material the material of the brain seems to be important for this, right? Like if you cut out a piece of someone's brain, they can no longer talk to you about what they're experiencing. So obviously the material is important here, right? In some way. But whether or not consciousness is generated by the brain or it's tapped into by the brain, I suppose that's something that no one's been able to figure out, right?
Yeah, but obviously I'm no expert, so
Yeah. So yeah, I guess George, to answer your question, that's that's one of the big things we don't understand is what consciousness is. Why does it feel like something to be alive? Versus my computer, I assume that my computer does not feel anything, but it's also doing all sorts of computation. Why does the computation I do feel like something? And maybe, there are also people who say that actually maybe your computer feels stuff too, or maybe matter itself feels something too.
yeah. So that's like panpsychism a little,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
And these are just unknowns. Like we don't know. It's
yeah.
that's the only question
Yeah, I
we
mean it's
got
funny. It's like, yeah, okay.
so far. Sorry, say what you were gonna say.
No, I'm just gonna say like, yeah, I mean like the argument is like whether or not this is even a good question.
Yeah,
Um, that itself is kind of a open question.
right.
But it's so funny because like it's almost to us individually, like the subjective experience is literally all we know.
Right.
And somehow that's the thing that we can't know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I describe it like this: like expecting that we can understand consciousness is kind of like expecting that a dog could swallow itself. The last bite is really difficult,
Yeah.
And like, could a human mind understand what it is to be a mind? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know that it's even possible to fully comprehend consciousness. So maybe the only way we'll figure this out is we'll build a computer that's smarter than us, and it can figure out how we work, but it can't figure out how it works, and so on. It's just, you know, um, unexplained consciousness all the way up. It's turtles all the way down, unexplained consciousness all the way up. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we're at about an hour and a half now, or getting close there. Uh, yeah, I feel like this was fun. Like teasing apart what is science. Anything you want to say before we part ways here? So your argument is that we should think about organisms as having agency. Is that what you think? Having agency or
Yeah.
calling them agents? Is there a difference
Having
between those
agency.
two? Okay,
Having agency.
and
Yeah.
I guess we could have teased that apart a little bit more here. What exactly do you
Sure.
mean by agency?
So I think this comes down to like this reductionist idea, which is we try to take apart things that we take it apart. Um, we by taking things apart, we remove the organism, right? And so
Hmm.
like it's like the organism itself is never a causal agent. Like it's never has a causal role in its own persistence because it's just a genes or it's just an environment. Um, but I think the organism is more of like the kind of interaction between these two things. And through these interactions, it actually has some form of autonomy,
Hmm.
where there's like a self and there's like an environment, an ability to process information kind of like gives it the capacity to like make decisions to navigate and like so a while ago I said like evolution is an optimization problem, and some people
Yeah.
don't like that because it's kind of like adaptionist and it kind of implies some idea that there's a problem for things to solve. But I'm okay with that because I think that problem is subjective. Like the agent, because it has some sort of autonomy, it can form the problem that it wants to solve. So I don't think necessarily has to be imposed by the environment. But yeah,
Okay.
basically, I think organisms should be studied or um, should be as real of a thing than whatever parts is made out of. And
Okay. Yeah.
that's kind of what gives it autonomy and an agency.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to simplify this. Like, so to get away from consciousness or the concept of agency, because these are things. Again, there's a lot of baggage behind both of these words here. But
Yeah,
like, if I just think about teeth, like
yeah,
the evolutionary invention of teeth was a huge innovation, it allows me to process energy that was previously could not be processed, because I can now smash things. Which, if you look at bacteria, for example, or single-celled organisms, they're doing everything with chemical reactions. They're trying to digest things and break things apart, all at the molecular level. Once you get teeth, you can now just smash stuff, which is awesome. And then you can have all the chemical reactions afterwards that do the further breaking down.
Yeah.
But the emergence of teeth, it's a bunch of cells working together to create these teeth. And those teeth then smash stuff. And it's a bunch of cells working together to let those teeth smash things. And yeah, you have to study the teeth at the level of teeth. You can't just study that only at the level of genes, or else it doesn't make sense. But I don't feel like there's ever been confusion about that. Like, of course, we have to study this system at its
It's not just teeth though. The
macro
function comes
level.
with how it's used with. You need something to smash as well.
Yeah. You're right.
And so asking why is it smashing?
But I feel like we already study everything so we study things at the biome level, we study things at the ecology level, we study things at the individual level, we study things at the cellular level. Like, I feel like there's already this multi-level view of studying biology. So I guess what I don't understand the complaint. Like, when people say that reductionism is we're ignoring the organism, I don't understand where that comes from, because there's tons of literature about organisms and their behavior, or their organs and how those organs function, and how an ecosystem functions and so on. Do you feel like there's actually a lack of?
No, I totally agree with you on that. I'm personally still also figuring out whether or not it's like ontologically worth labeling an emergent thing that's like has its own, fundamental existence. But another thing is more of like, I think for me at least, it's like more of a political thing.
Yeah.
Where, like, for example, I feel like reductionism somehow implies some sort of determinism, and it becomes really, really political, but also a little bit like social, in the sense that, like, I look at you and I can say, like, because you're this, so I can know who you are. And I can basically explain you based on the parts that you have.
Right.
But like, I feel like life is I really think that life and non-life is kind of the capacity to change and morph into things that you can't even predict or anticipate. So, yeah. And so I feel like that's kind of the concept of emergence, where, the thing becomes something more than just whatever the parts are.
So maybe you feel like we're too confident in what can be concluded.
Yeah.
Based on current knowledge. Yeah, I would agree with that. Interesting. I'm trying to see if there's any more questions from people before we close here. Yeah, it looks like that's it. Well, any final words before we part ways here?
Well, I guess, this has turned out better than I thought it would be. Honestly didn't know what to expect. And thank you for the invitation, and it was really good chatting with you.
Yeah, it's fun to just go wherever it goes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put a link in the video description here in a couple of minutes to William's article, and it's pretty cool. It's fun to think about even the process of evolution itself as an algorithm. It's really interesting to think about it that way. Thanks for coming on, and good luck on future endeavors. You're about to travel for the holidays. Safe travels, and I'll talk to you later.
See ya. Bye.
So long.